Another aspect of consulting that I suspect you might be able to provide a good analogy for, I guess we'll find out now the pressure's on,
Oh
is
man.
that when you're doing consulting, you have to be able to demonstrate that you're delivering a return on the client's investment, some
Oh
ROI.
my gosh. Yeah.
How have you achieved that in your engagements?
So, this might sound super obvious, but one of the biggest missteps is not having the right value hypothesis at the onset of a project. And I I talk about this a lot in context of AI because we get enamored with the model itself, like the patient example I was just talking about. We get enamored with, can it accurately predict who's going to qualify, versus really stopping to think about what decisions are we influencing and what does the success of that decision look like. In another example where we worked with cancer readmissions, we were working with a health system, and we were trying to help them build models that could help them with solid state tumor cancer patients, and who nationally have a readmit rate of about 25%. It's really bad. So if you can use machine learning to identify who's most at risk, you can maybe come up with a more effective intervention. In our very first iteration, we were actually modestly successful. It's a very tricky population to work with because of the complexity of the patients. But the providers would say, okay, now what? Right? This patient's at risk. What do you want me to do? It's actually cognitively overwhelming and not helpful when you have this alert and you're not actually offering a solution. So we actually had to go back to interpretability again and think about what would be useful to know. Is this patient at risk because they're on a certain type of medication, or they have a certain comorbidity, or um, some social attributes that we knew about the patient, like they come from a zip code that has low reliable access to transportation. So this patient actually might be readmitted not because they're super sick, but because they might use the ER in an inappropriate way. So let's get them some social assistance. So it's really interesting to think about, like, when we talk about models, we get very excited as data scientists about the accuracy of the models, and we don't stop to think what levers, what decisions are we influencing? What's the value of a successful intervention? And then realistically, like, how often is that decision going to be influenced by whatever work we're doing? So we now work with clients up front to try to map that out. We try to challenge it. We try to stress test it. In this readmission example, we actually would say, okay, we can identify 80% of these patients, and we think realistically that there's only going to be a 20% intervention rate. And so the value is based off of that. Then we stop, check with the client, hey, if this is the only value that we get, is it still worth X investment to try to figure out this process? And then you go through the project, and as you learn more, as you validate your models, you keep going back to that early hypothesis.